Ad Hoc Committee meeting for the proposal to renew parking leases at 20 Bacchus Avenue, lots I-17011-1 and I-17011-2, beginning at 7:15 on Tuesday evening, May 19th, here in the caucus room on the third floor of City Hall. Present we have myself, Jack Knapp, Chairman. Absent is Mary Teichel. She will not be here tonight. We also have Councilman Paul Rottello, who sits on the committee. We have Les Pinter as Corporation Counsel. Soon to be here will be Paul Essifon, and I'll introduce him when he gets here. He's our airport administrator. Our Director of Finance, David St. Hilaire, will not be here tonight, and I don't see Dennis Olpern, our Director of Planning. We also have here the petitioner, William Biddle, from Herstad Biddle Properties in Greenwich. Okay, and we also have present right on time, actually 1:47 seconds late.
Make sure that's in the minutes.
Depends on whose watch that is, though.
Yes.
Our planning director, Dennis Olpern. Okay, what I'd like to do, just to bring everybody up to speed, this is our third meeting of this group. First was back in September. We also had one back on February 4th of 2009 of this year. And what I'd like to do is just read quickly a recap of the minutes of that meeting so we can all be pretty much on the same page as to where we're going this evening. And again, this is the ad hoc report to renew the parking leases for Wednesday. And this is from Wednesday, February 4th, 2009. Chairman Jack Knapp called the meeting to order at 6:35 p.m. on Wednesday, February 4th, 2009 in the caucus room, 3rd floor, Danbury City Hall, 155 Darrell Avenue. Present was committee members Paul Rottello and Mary Teichel. Also present were Laszlo L. Pinter, Deputy Corporation Counsel, David St. Hilaire, Finance Director, Dennis Olpern, Director of Planning and Zoning, Paul Estefan, Airport Administrator, and William Biddle from Herstad Biddle Properties, the petitioner, as well as members of the public. And we also have members of the public here this evening. Chairman Knapp introduced everyone present at the meeting. Chairman Knapp explained that the purpose of the evening's meeting was to review and consider approving the proposed renewal of parking leases at 20 Bacchus Avenue, lots I-17011-1 and 2. We read the ad hoc report of the meeting of September 17th. The petitioner is seeking a rent schedule that is significantly less than the rate paid previously. Mr. Olpern pointed out that the petitioner would need to secure 23 spaces in order to meet the zoning requirements. Currently, the petitioner is leasing 75 spaces. The annual rental agreement in place is for $9,800. Somebody else want to read it?
That's Mozart.
The annual rental agreement in place is $9,863 for the side parcel and $5,472 for the rear parcel. Mr. Pinter explained that the petitioner is seeking to reduce the rent for the rear parcel to $3,000 annually with a 10% increase every 5 years and $5,000 annually with a 10% increase every 5 years. Chairman Knapp asked Mr. Pinter to update everyone as to why the appraisal was conducted. Mr. Pinter explained that the request was made on September 2008 meeting so the committee could have a better sense of the fair market value on the property. The committee reviewed the land appraisal report. Ms. Teichel inquired what the appraisal amounts were for the parcels. Mr. St. Hilaire explained that the rear parcel's appraised value was $20,000 per year. The side parcel's appraised value was $32,800 per year. Chairman Knapp asked Mr. Biddle how the committee could justify such a reduction in the rental parcels. Mr. Biddle explained that currently a majority of the spaces are not being used, but he continues to maintain them. He pointed out that the appraisal may not take into account usability or need for parking versus no need for parking. He felt the appraisal was based on a long-term lease where an owner can rely on the parking spaces, not a lease that can be taken away by the city. Mr. Olpern suggested he retain the side parcel but relinquish the rear parcel. Mr. Biddle pointed out the restrictions in the lease. Mr. Olpern suggested Mr. Biddle retained the side parcel. The city would increase the per space fee to offset the loss of the rear parcel. Mr. St. Hilaire suggested increasing the fee schedule for the side parcel to $25 a space times 45 spaces. Mr. Biddle would in turn save money as he would no longer be required to maintain the rear parcel. Chairman Knapp asked what would be the fate of the rear parcel. Mr. Estefan explained that the parcel is not landlocked. If the parcel reverts back to the city, the parcel is accessible from the airport. The spaces can be configured to accommodate renting the spaces for planes, approximately $125 a month, a plane depending on the wingspan of the plane. He expressed confidence in being able to find a use for the rear parcel Mr. Biddle pointed out that he has a vested interest in the property, as he has already renovated the property quite a bit and will continue to do what is necessary to maintain the value of the property. He will continue to do what is necessary to make sure the building is occupied by tenants. He expressed a desire to work with the city to reach an amicable agreement. Mr. Pinter pointed out that the request of the committee in September was to include a tax component, which he suggested be included. He recommended having Mr. Biddle review the documentation and return to the committee with alternate suggestions for their consideration. Ms. Teichelt suggested including a contingency in the lease whereby Mr. Biddle would have an option to reacquire the rear parcel should a tenant require additional parking spaces. Mr. Pinter recommended creating an option arrangement which leases the parcel for $1. Should the need arise where the tenant would require additional parking spaces, the agreement would then revert into a rental agreement and the fees can be negotiated at that point in time. Motion was made by Councilwoman Teichelt and seconded by Councilman Rotella that the committee reconvene in 90 days to afford Mr. Biddle the opportunity to return to the committee with alternate suggestions for a lease. Motion carried unanimously. Motion adjourned at 7:30. Okay, so that was the minutes of our previous meeting. And then, since that meeting, we do have here in front of us, Councilman Rotella, you have a copy of it. I know that Mr. Biddle does, because he wrote it, as well as Mr. Pinter, of the proposal that you've come back with. What I want to do, just for the record, so everybody understands, is I'll read, so that everybody knows where we're at, the letter that we got from Mr. Biddle. It was addressed to Mr. Laszlo Pinter, City of Danbury, Connecticut, reference Bacchus Avenue parking leases. Dear Laszlo, as a follow-up to your March 16th letter, attached are two proposed leases for the parcels of land adjacent to our shopping center. Please note that the lease for the 42 spaces, for the 42-space side parcel is proposed to commence 7/1/09, and the lease for the 33-space rear parcel is set as an option agreement with an annual payment of 5% of the lease amount annually commencing 7/1/09. The proposed rents are the same as the last rental period, which expired in 2008. We hope that the city considers the absolute terrible economy when considering these proposals. We do not lease parking at any of our other properties, so I do not have any comparables to share. Finally, although we paid the rent on the formal leases for many months after they expired, we have not used the spaces since the fall and do not feel that we should have to pay rent on spaces we do not rent for use for the period of 1/1/09 to present. Perhaps this is something we can discuss at the next meeting, at the next committee meeting. Please let me know what your next steps are. Very truly yours, and it was from Melinda. So, Mr. Biddle, thank you for that. Being this is our third meeting, I've been able to study up on this one quite a bit. Just to go over to recap what I just went through as far as numbers go, because I think that's the crutch of the thing here. There's a couple things. One, when we sat down last time, we were dramatically less. Our current numbers, and let's use the 42 side piece, because that seems to be the hot piece. Our current price now is $9,863 is what we're getting annually for that 42 parking spaces. Your proposal is that number. Actually, it's 66 cents more. Thank you for that nickel a month, 9863.66. So in that respect, that's good, because back when we met back in February, your proposal was for $5,000, or about half of that. So I can appreciate that you've come up to the table on that to come at least back to where we're currently at, so we're not, as a city, taking a step backwards. The first question I have, I guess, is to Les, pertaining to the second piece. The second piece, we're currently at $5,472. If in fact it did kick in, the number being proposed is $6,384, which is more than what we're currently getting, but obviously we're not going to jump into that right out of the gate. And it's the last proposal you had was for $3,000, so I'm glad we've gotten away from that piece of it. Les, could you explain the option agreement that we're looking at there on that second piece? In other words, the 42, we know what the numbers are, and he's ready to start that commencing July 1. The option agreement piece.
That one, the proposal is to pay 5% of the previous rent, pending the negotiations with the tenant in the former Boston Billiards facility. And once that tenant has been secured, then the rent would go to the original last rent, the number you quoted, 6,800 or whatever that was, for the initial period, and then it would be a 10% adjustment after the first 5 years. So they would pay 5% while there was a vacancy in that facility.
Is
Is
that
that-
the way that?
My
Mr.
understanding is slightly different. We would option it. We'd make the option payments until such time as we determined that we needed it,
That's what I
not
agreed.
necessarily if the space is leased, because we may lease the space, and we have signed a lease now with Chuck E. Cheese for the space, which is, they're seeking approvals for their use right now.
Okay.
We believe that that rear parcel is not needed to satisfy zoning, but we wanted to see if there is a practical need at some point in the future for more parking to satisfy the tenants, and make it a better shopping experience. And if that was the case, then we would exercise the option to kick that lease into place.
Okay. So what we'd be doing, Les, and correct me if I'm wrong, we'd be locking up that piece so that the airport wouldn't have access to it. We'd be collecting 5%, and it'd be for an undetermined period. It could go as much as 3, 4, 5, 10 years before you came back to us and said you needed it. So
Conceivably, right.
conceivably, that would be.
That could be, it could be a short period of time or a long period of time.
Okay.
Right.
And if we do that, do we throw up a fence in the meantime? I mean, I don't know if I was them and we don't do nothing, it becomes,
Well, the
we'll
lease.
use it because, it's there for us, I mean, are you gonna tell the guy that pulls into the parking lot that wants to park in the back, you can't park there, because
Well-
we'd have to cordon that off, no?
Well, that can be negotiated. The proposal as submitted is to give them an option, basically, to use the premises when it's needed. You could easily negotiate that option to include the city's right to use the property pending that need on UB Danbury's part, and then open it up at that time. That's not in the lease as proposed, but that could be, again, the lease is a draft lease
Mhm.
proposed by the tenant, but you could certainly work with that to allow for some alternate use.
All right, so that was the question I had on that. The other thing, I'm just trying to go through what I've thrown on the table so far. As far as there's two things that are weighing on my mind. One is to sit here and say that we're gonna forgive your rent since January 1 of '09 because nobody's been in there. That's gonna be a hard pill for me to swallow. I don't know that, I don't know what Paul's feeling is on that, but I mean, I just don't know how I could sit here and say that, you've had access, even though we know nobody's been there, it's been your least responsibility, if you will, or unleased responsibility, so, I don't know that that's a fair thing for you to ask of us. So I don't know that I could support that piece of it.
Can I
So
respond to that?
if you would.
Well, we don't actually have a lease right now.
Mhm.
So that's sort of our position. We don't have a lease, and B, we're not using the area. So we're not sure what we would be paying rent on if we don't have a lease.
Okay. On history maybe, but.
Through the chair?
If I could, yeah, Paul.
Is there a notice to quit built into here if they want to vacate the property? Do they need to notify the city?
It's not built into the existing leases,
So when the lease expired, their obligation to pass expired simultaneously?
unless they continue to use it. If they continue to use it, their
Do they need to
obligation
notify
continues.
us that they're continuing to use it?
They would need to notify us one way or the other, that they're using
Okay,
it. or
did they
not.
do that?
They notified us, they didn't notify us they were not going to use it. They
Okay.
notified us that they're not using it as much as they did before, and they wanted to renegotiate a lease according to certain terms. So there was no notice that we're not using it. The notice was that we're not vacating the
Okay,
premises.
so there was sort of an...
But we want to renegotiate.
There was some ambiguity in the notice? Okay.
Yes.
They
yes.
didn't say they were taking it, or they didn't say they were not taking it. They said that they were sort of mulling things over, and in the meantime, they'd like
Right.
to use it under different... Okay.
It was a somewhat complex set of
Okay, all right.
circumstances.
If I may, through the chair to Dennis, is his reading correct? Will Chuck E. Cheese need those spaces?
What is Chuck E. Cheese?
It's one of those pizza places for kids. They've got stuffed animals. If Disney made a pizza joint, it would be Chuck E. Cheese. Something like
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah, it's a,
The,
Neil Bushnell, the guy who started Atari, the game thing, rolled from there into this.
into Chuck E. Cheese.
Robots, it's a kid's, it's a
Okay.
theme pizza place.
Well, we calculate parking requirements for restaurants differently than we do for retail. It's based on seats, whereas retail is based on square footage. So I can't tell you right now how much actually would be needed. That would depend on the number of seats, and the requirement is 1 space per 4 seats. I can't tell you that definitively. You might guess that 43 spaces, was it?
42.
2 spaces may be enough, but I can't say that definitely right now.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the previous tenant was a restaurant, if you will, even a Boston Billiards, but it was the same.
It was a billiard hall.
Right, but even so, it would conform, I don't know if they had a cafe permit or what they were.
I don't know, I think we calculated that as, I'm
As a
not sure.
restaurant, did we not?
I'm not sure. But what we need to, and in fair warning, is that we don't want to so restrict the amount of parking that's available that if they do come in with a new use, regardless of the lease agreement, they don't have enough. Now, you can argue that you wouldn't use it and that sort of thing, but I still have the zoning issue there. That would have to be resolved. And I wouldn't want to put the city in that position. My suspicion is that 42 should be sufficient.
Right, I mean, if 23 was the number before, 42's
One would.
more than likely gonna.
More than likely, I mean, I wouldn't swear to that, but let's say that's a reasonable assumption. So I wouldn't want to see him lose the space that he has because of future possibilities, which could create problems for him as well as for the city.
Okay. And then just one other piece of the pie, I just want to get on the table before we start going around the table. At one point in the minutes from the last meeting, I just want to read it so I can read it to it. And Mr. Pinner pointed out that the request of the committee in September was to include a tax component, which he suggested be included. It's my understanding there's a hefty tax bill floating out there right now. Who thinks they're right and who thinks they're wrong, I'm sure is gonna become a battle somewheres, because we're talking in a neighborhood of $125,000 in taxes that we see that you feel you don't need to pay and or should be paying, and we feel you do. Where do we stand on that? If we were to agree to these numbers, are we this plus tax, this not taxed? We need to, you follow where I'm at? So I'm sort of asking that to Les because.
Yeah, let me address that issue, if you could, Chair. That's the taxes has been an issue for a number of years. Tisano Realty was the original tenant of these 2 parking lots. Tisano Realty's lease was a form lease similar to the leases that expired in 2008. Tisano Realty was assessed by the assessor and paid the taxes through the time that UB Danbury took it over. The assessor assesses land that the city leases to a private party under the statute that states that if municipal property is not used for municipal purposes, an assessment is authorized. So the assessor looks at this or any other property, including other property at the airport, where there's a lease, and assesses that property on that theory, on that statutory reality that if a property is used for private purposes, as these lots were, taxes are due. Tisano paid them. UB Danbury, from early in the lease period, around 2001, which is when the taxes had begun to build up, took the position that since they're a tenant and the lease doesn't specifically have a clause in it that says that taxes are due and they may be assessed, they took the position that they're tenants, not owners, and they're not subject to the tax. That's been the argument really since 2001. And one of Mr. Biddle's first early employees, John Merritt, and I went through this for a number of years, back and forth, trying to come to some accommodation, including a visit to the Common Council subcommittee that Warren Levy had chaired in 2003 or 4, I think, where an attempt was made to roll 2 leases into one lease, include a property tax component in that lease, and adjust the rent accordingly. That, unfortunately, didn't go anywhere, so the leases kept moving forward in the form they were, with UB taking their position, city taking our position, the taxes built up, and that's why you have the total tax that we have. So that's kind of the background of that. And I think that there have been a couple of efforts to try to accommodate this tax issue somehow. The problem is it's built up to such a high number that it would be a little more difficult to, let's say, work it into a lease than it was before. But it's out there. And you know, it's going to be a matter of continuing dispute probably, because the assessor is confident that these properties are assessable, even though they're leases, and the finance director supports that view. So that's out there. So that could be worked into a lease, it could be resolved independently. Ideally, it would be better to resolve it initially, which, by the way, what Mr. Merritt at the time in 2004, 2005 suggested, that we need to resolve this issue prior to any new lease being entertained, which I would agree with, even now. Ideally, that should be resolved one way or the other. So that's the background, without making it too long. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. With all that being said, Mr. Biddle, obviously we have conflicting views on the tax scenario. How would you expect us to go back to the taxpayers of the city of Danbury and say, well, you know, we're just going to let them slide for 125 because they're going to, you know, take us forward here? And I just don't see that as a feasible. 0 is not a good number, you know. Maybe 125 is not the right number, but in any event, we've got to find some happy medium here.
I don't want to be portrayed as someone that doesn't pay their taxes.
No.
We pay the properties we have in Danbury, we pay our taxes, we pay them on time, we've paid them on time ever since we've bought our properties. I can't comment if Mr. Chisano was paying the real estate taxes or not. It was my recollection that he was not, that there were not taxes due on this. I may be mistaken on that. When we purchased the property, we obtained an estoppel certificate from the city certifying that these were the leases, there are no other agreements, and what the amounts were due. There's no mention of any taxes being due in here. The leases do not provide for any taxes to be paid. The lease is very explicit that it is a gross lease. The only amount paid is the payment due. There's nothing about taxes. So we simply take the position of we are supposed to pay what the lease calls for. If the lease said we're supposed to pay taxes, we'd be paying taxes. And the other thing I might mention is that in looking at the tax bills for these properties, these leased parcels, they are grossly overassessed. So when looking at the amount that has built up, it's built up on a assessed value that is, I think, completely out of line for, you know, what their value is. And we haven't had to pay the taxes, and we don't have standing to appeal the taxes because we're not required to pay taxes on the parcels. So there's no way for us to even challenge those assessments, even if we were responsible for it.
It's a bump in the road.
I've had counsel look at this, and I've had outside counsel, I've had in-house counsel look at it, and everyone has told me that these leases do not provide that taxes are to be paid on them.
Okay. try to gather my thought here and throw it at Les. What would our recourse be? Biddle's situation aside, what would our recourse be on a $125,000 tax bill that's sitting out there? We would normally sue, would we not, or would we normally take some form of legal action to collect that? We don't want to do that, obviously, we want to come to an amicable agreement, but
Well, you have options. You can sue on the debt, you can take it to a collection agency, have them attempt to collect it, or you can sell the delinquency to a firm that buys these things. Those are three options immediately. So the city could choose any one of those options, or another option is to negotiate out of it to resolve the issue. So those are the options.
Mr. Estefan.
Through the chair, Mr. Biddle, who signed the estoppel?
Mark Boughton, Mayor.
We know him.
Heard that.
And I believe these taxes were sold in the future, because I got a call from somebody in Florida saying he had bought the tax lien and I better pay, otherwise he was going to foreclose and take my property. This was about 3 years ago.
Geez, don't let him do that.
I directed him to call the
He
city.
didn't win that battle, did he?
I might add, we bought this shopping center and assumed these leases in 2002. If the city really felt that there were taxes due for 7 years, why isn't the city pursuing us legally? Or if we're in default of our leases, why hasn't the city ever placed us in default of our leases?
Point well taken. So,
Oh, that's worth checking.
that we'll have to look into. Paul, did you have a statement?
Yeah, I think that if we were entertaining solving this tax issue this evening, we were being profoundly optimistic.
Yeah, well, I didn't expect to.
If the tax are gonna hold this lease hostage, we might as well just go home and call H&R Block or something, because I don't think we're gonna noodle that out in the next 45 minutes. However, I think that certainly going forward, we should try to clear this up. I mean, it's not unusual to have a lease where the leaseor or the leasee pays the taxes, pays for garbage removal, or pays for, maintenance, pays for any number of things, but usually those terms are spelled out in the lease. It sounds like they weren't spelled out in this particular lease. I'm not sure how strong our position is, regardless of what the state statute allows us to do. It would seem to me that if we were going to write a lease like that, we would have to actually write a lease like that. Otherwise, we'd have to eat those taxes. But I'm not an attorney. I'm not a lease attorney, so I don't know where this would go in any kind of court. But it would seem to me a lot easier to create the lease going forward with those particulars in it. It also seems to me for these spaces that we're talking about and the amount of time that the taxes were outstanding, that Mr. Biddle may have a point, that those taxes seem to be a little high. $125,000 for how many years are we talking about?
Since
6 years.
2002.
2002. When we just
So we're
read
talking
this.
about the taxes
Yeah.
are double or triple the lease. I mean, we're looking at $18,000 a year in taxes for, well, okay, all right, I think,
I can address that, Paul, when you.
yeah, no, let me just finish where I'm going with this, and then we can open it back up. I think that for the purposes of tonight's discussion, I don't want to, determine where this committee is going, but I think that I can't solve the tax issue, but I would very much like to clear it up going forward. So if these leases do not specify the tax burden and who is liable for that, I think that we should go back and work that out with the petitioner in the tax office, mayor's office, wherever we want to go with this, before we ask this committee to approve or disapprove these particular leases. I think Mr. Biddle may have a point. They seem like they might be a little bit high, but I don't know if that's a 6-year thing or it's aggregated over 8 years, because of 18 years because of Cezanne or what. But going forward, I think that needs to be in here. So my next question to you would be, are taxes in here in this present lease?
they're not.
Okay.
They've asked that the taxes not be part of
Okay.
the payment.
Who asked?
There's a clause in the lease, in both leases
Okay.
from UB
Okay.
Danbury.
The petitioners asked that the taxes not be put into the
That
leases
there be
going
no real
forward.
estate taxes due.
Okay.
Correct, going forward.
So going forward, if we were to approve this particular document, he would be off the hook for the leases.
That's right.
So we would only be talking about this particular period.
Right.
Okay. So maybe that would make it easier. Maybe we could, and again, we're not going to solve this tonight, but maybe what we could do is come to some sort of agreement on the past taxes and incorporate that extra into this particular lease, since there won't be any more taxes if we go in that direction. So
Right.
anyway, well,
And just to address
Yeah.
that one point to
If you
to
would.
you, Jack, is that the clause omitting the real estate taxes was put in the new leases specifically to resolve this issue, so that it's clear for everybody that going forward, that's not going to be an issue. Okay? Unfortunately, that clause was not in the original leases, and that's why the question came up in 2001 or 2002 about that.
well, continuing the conversation through the chair, I can understand why Mr. Biddle would want that clause in there. I'm not sure how comfortable the city is with that clause removed.
Well, the assessor will have to abide by that, because...
No, I understand
Yeah.
that, but I'm not.
How
I'm not-
comfortable?
Right, I'm not how sure the administration, let's put it that
Right,
way, would
right.
be with us taking money off the table without necessarily having to. I mean, I appreciate the fact that Mr. Biddle wants this resolved, but resolved to, as Mr. Knapp mentioned, down to a figure of zero is perhaps not the.
And just through the chair to you, Paul, just to understand that when I mentioned that a previous council committee had reviewed renegotiating this lease into one lease and incorporating the real estate taxes, that was the purpose of that, is to try to weave into the leases not only elimination of the taxes as such, separately assessed, but to incorporate them as one larger rent payment. That was the intent. So the rent that UB Danbury has been paying would have been a higher rent for the last 7 years, or whatever number of years, incorporating those taxes
Sure.
in there. That was
Right.
the intent.
Right.
So it wouldn't
Well,
balloon it
that's where I
to
was
such a
going
point.
also, we could do that going forward, I mean, but the thing is, and it would satisfy Mr. Biddle in the sense there wouldn't be any taxes. It would satisfy the city in the sense that this figure was getting paid down to some extent, regardless of whether you want to call it a tax payback or not, the city would be accruing some funds.
But just to answer your question, Paul, whether the city would have a problem, what I mean to say is that in 2004 or 5, the idea, so the city would not be put off. The city would incorporate an extra rent component to make up for those taxes, so the city would be happy, and UB Danbury would be compliant with the rent that includes some taxes.
And that's kind of my idea for
Yeah.
this going forward. Okay, all right.
The way that if I could continue, the way that I'm reading this, and I'm looking at the larger piece, not the smaller piece, is that the current taxes were at $5,400, in the mid $5,000 range annually, up until '07 when they jumped, they actually doubled. And I'm sure that's because of our assessment, correct? So
Yes.
that's where it's at. So right now, if you look at what their taxes would have been last year, would have been $10,989, $949. That's basically the same price as what we're looking to get for rent for the thing. I don't know that that's, to Mr. Biddle's point, I'm sure it's a feasible number by the assessor's office, but I don't know if that's, So I think that for the purpose of, I don't know that we're gonna close the deal tonight, unless you astound me with something.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't know, I would bring up time limits and things like that. I don't know how anxious
So,
Mr. Biddle is to
Mr. Biddle,
move on
you
this.
want
I just wanted to mention, this is the city's appraisal, so this is the copy of the card, this assessment card. I believe this is the .3 acre one, so I think this is the
So you got the lot number?
side yard.
-1 is the side, I think -2 is the back. Yeah, F-47.
Map. Building 101 card. Well, we can figure out which one it is, but the net appraised value is $748,000. for a 10,000 square foot parcel.
It's a nice piece of property.
That would mean on
We're
an
gonna get it
acre.
for 6.
His land is worth something like $4 million an acre, so there's something a little odd about the assessment. And this one,
The Exxon station, bare ground, sold for $1 million
Is that right?
before they built
That's probably
it.
what's happened, that they built.
What did, Paul?
The Exxon station, back in the 90s, the raw ground sold for $1 million.
so a little strip of land that's 20 feet wide and 400 feet long, not on a corner with a light, is worth 4 times per acre.
Could I ask you, well, Dennis, you might know this, the land, the assessment that we're looking at there, that he's looking at, does that include the horseshoe pits and that whole piece of property there, or is that just the strip of property?
Well, it's .38 of an acre, so
I doubt that.
Yeah.
an acre is, how many square feet's an acre? 40?
43,580.
So you're looking at 12,000 square feet or something, 15, 14,000 square feet?
15.
So 10 by 400 is 4,000, so it would be all those parking spaces and
20
another.
by
would
40,
be
400.
Yeah, it would be those parking spaces times 3. So it would be more than that slot.
The side piece is 10,000 square feet, the rear is 16.4, so it's just the strips. It's
Okay,
not
because that
the-
assessment was .38 of an acre.
Yeah, again, remember that, I'm sorry,
Yeah, no problem.
through you,
Right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
the,
I think so.
the assessment, the field cards are one of the reasons why you asked for an appraisal. The field cards are based on market evaluations of airport property. Airport property is pretty highly valued
It's
because it is highly valuable.
Mhm.
But you asked for an appraisal, and I can't tell you right now whether the appraisal supports that or not, but the appraisal that we got from, the committee asked for and got from Nochi was able to value the rents. Okay, so that's what provides, not necessarily the taxability or the assessment of it, but it provides the rent that should be, so I don't really know how the assessor assessed those lots, but whatever formula she used, it was based off some documentation that she had, but for your purposes, you know, and she could probably take this appraisal and derive a better assessment from that, probably, because it's a more value-oriented document.
If you take a look at the appraisal, a substantial part of their analysis to arrive at the rent that they thought was a market rent was taking these assessed valuations and applying an 8% return on them to come up with what the rent should be for the property.
Okay, so to move ourselves forward, I'm not comfortable with voting yea or nay tonight to present to the council. I don't know if you are.
No.
I think that we need to delay, but I don't want to delay too long because we don't want Chuck E. Cheese to pull out on us. You know? Otherwise, Dennis is never going to learn what a Chuck E. Cheese is.
Oh, Dennis, you'll be amazed. You'll be eating there on a weekly basis.
Oh, it sounds like an artery
Screaming
clogger to me.
7-year-olds.
So with all that being said, what I'd like to do is maybe extend this meeting of this committee for a period of X amount of days. We'll come up with that for the purpose of trying to settle. I'm comfortable with the dollar figures that you put forward for the property. At least I am. I don't know if Paul is, but you know, because it's a flat dollar figure, so I can sort of deal with that in today's economy.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Paul?
As the airport administrator, I can't go off 30 years.
No, I was getting there. So the dollar figure I'm comfortable with, and I'll just get to Paul's point. The term of the lease going that far out, I think that we really need to, I know when we sat here last time, we were talking 5s and 10s. Mr. Biddle was talking that a lot in this day and age, a lot of people are looking for the 20. But 30 is, I want somebody to be able to call me and ask me, do you remember that meeting? 30 years from now, I don't know. So,
Yeah, well,
Read the file.
I hate to remind you, but you don't lose long-term memory loss, it's the short-term
Yeah,
memory
you
loss.
gotta, you gotta file the short term before it becomes.
So with that
long-term.
being said, I'd like to get a more comfortable feeling, I mean, you know, and we can talk about it if you want now, but the term of the lease, I think the 30 years that you're looking for is just a little bit out there for us. Paul, from the airport perspective, you say you're not comfortable with 30. You know, I mean, and there's escalator clauses that go in throughout the course of that, so it's not like we're the same amount for 30 years. From the airport standpoint, what are we looking at from your perspective?
We normally do 5 and 10, both on and off the airport.
And would that
That'd
be,
what I'm referring to on and off. Red Lobster and Olive Garden is off, that location this gentleman has is off. Across from the Exxon station, that's,
the Olive Garden's
Yeah.
our property?
yeah,
And
So
we've
is
got
that
5
right?
and 10 with them? That's what we got with
Well,
them?
We have more, we have 10 with, I think, 2 5s. Those are longer term. At that time, the leases were negotiated for longer terms.
because they're putting buildings up and they were paying property taxes and building taxes on top of it. Plus, the income was coming into the airport side of the revenue stream, so we could show to the FAA, and this is where I'm leading to. The FAA is now looking at the airport in its entirety, and they've asked to look at all leases, both inside and outside the airport. And they want to make sure that the airport is getting fair market value for the property they lease, no matter who it is. And we're getting ready, I transferred all of our leases, all of our documentation to our consultant. And we had a work scope meeting just recently with the FAA on a telcon, and they,
On a tower,
huh?
a tower, telecom,
Phone,
yeah.
yeah, sorry.
Well, I thought you meant a lease for a communication.
No,
Okay, all right.
no, telephone conversation, where we all got on, and there were like 3 or 4, yeah, maybe 4 or 5 FAA people, and my consultants and myself, and we were talking, and the first thing they hit me on was leases. We want to see your leases, we want to see how you derived your dollar amounts, we want to see if there's no appraisal on them, we want you to go back and revisit it and look at an appraisal. And they went on and on and on.
Right, so I think what we need to do is we need to come up with, I mean, we're talking, it'd be very, in thinking about it, it's hard to compare this to Olive Garden or the thing, because those
I
are buildings
realize
and
that.
restaurants and properties, but, you know, we're talking about parking places here. I think we need to come back with a more, and we both need to research it, both UB and us as the city, a more feasible number for taxes, and are we gonna build that in? If we're not, do we wanna get a higher rent, including the tax? You know, so that we can at least justify in our mind that, you know, this is feasible, let's use this number, build it in, and maybe bump the rental number. So, and I would be surprised if it came back at $10,000 more than the $9,000 or $9,800 that we're getting. So I think we need a more reasonable number to match the $9,863 that we're currently getting, as opposed to that. So, and I think we need to work through the assessor's office to make that happen.
Just so you know, sir, our office has no say in what the taxes that are assessed.
No, I understand.
That's set by whatever formula.
Mhm.
that
And we might come back and say, you know what, it's just not feasible, so, Mr. Biddle, can you give us another $1,000 and let's call it a day and move on?
I would like the consideration of the committee that once it's finally negotiated, that I get comment from the FAA. They're going to want to look at
Yeah,
this.
all right. If you could remind us that.
I will.
And remember,
Before
Mr. Chairman,
anything-
that these leases are expired. Remember
We have
that.
nothing right now.
You have nothing. You don't need to renew the leases, except that Mr. Biddle
Well-
would have a problem with the parking. I was going to address that. But again, the leases are expired. That's been already stated. Whatever use there is, limited or otherwise, the leases are expired.
Well, with the permit department wouldn't allow you to open if you're under.
No,
Park.
and that's the danger.
Right.
That puts us in a.
That's why when I say extend the meeting, I'm not talking about going another night.
No, that puts us in a difficult position, and of course it puts you in a difficult position. And it raises a policy issue in the future about leasing public land
Mhm.
for parking. You may feel good at the end of the day that you've done something to help a businessman. But then you get to something like this at the end, and then you've got a real problem, or potential problem. Because worst case scenario is we would have to order them to shut down. You couldn't use Boston Burger,
Yeah.
you know?
Bringing up something
That's the
that
worst
occurred
case
to me.
scenario that you could get into.
Let me say, Mr. Chairman, if I may, that between the last meeting and this meeting, is when the FAA started. Actually, it was about a week or two later, I started getting letters, phone calls. We did an inspection last year, we need to talk, we need to see this, we need to see that. And that's why I'm here tonight, because unfortunately, I don't have much control over that.
Paul?
Yes?
Through the chair, what do you think their concern is? I mean,
Their-
is this just an accounting procedure, or do they have a deeper concern?
No, they don't have a secret agenda.
No,
We sign grants, as everybody's aware, and we do capital programs at the airport. In those grants are the assurances, the carrot. And in that carrot, it says that you'll be as self-sustaining as possible. They don't want you making a profit, but they don't want you losing. And they're looking to see whether we are balanced. Now, I said, I've been here over 30 years now, and it's the first time you've come in and you said you want to look at the books. Because we do a single audit act every year through the auditors, and we send that up to them, full disclosure. And I'm kind of like scratching my head, why now? Well, it's your turn for us to take a look at it. Well, they did take a look at us once before, and that was in the early 80s. And they found a problem with issues on the field. We straightened them out, and we moved on, and now they're back again. So it must be a cycle they have out there to come and look at airports. They look at 3 different airports a year. Large hub, medium hub, general aviation. It's my turn. And I mean, they walked the airport. They walked the streets around the airport. And they made a lot of notes. They were here for some time, last June.
Paul, let me ask you this, and one other piece of the pie that I'm having a little bit of trouble swallowing, Mr. Biddle, is to lock up the 33 parking spaces or the rear parcel for what amounts to $320 a year. Is that something that would benefit the city by saying, okay, let's agree to the -1 lease, but the -2 lease, we're taking it back, and we're putting up a fence, and that becomes us? I mean, does that help you? Does that hurt you? Does that take the FAA off our back as far as the leases? Because now we're only talking about the side as opposed to...
No, actually, it doesn't take it off our backs. I still have to justify the actions of the past. There's no getting around it. They're looking at today and they're looking at the future, but they're also looking at the past. Having said that, what we would probably do is do drainage work down there. We would flip the fence further to the property line. We would get in there and start making repairs or whatever we needed to in the ditch that runs behind it, where all the water comes through. Now, we've got about 8,000 acres of water that comes off that hill to the west of the airport, comes through the airport. It's Cannonball,
Spruce Mountain.
Carriage House, all of that. Not Spruce Mountain. Spruce Mountain goes on the other side. But all of that comes down through, goes right behind his location, and it goes to the end, crosses over, goes into a pond, and then it's metered into the main system, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's fine, but I might have to do more flood storage in the future. So if that was the case, then I would pull that fence over, block it off, no disrespect to your business, and make those adjustments from an engineering standpoint, and be done with it.
And that's my point. I mean, maybe now is the time for that to happen. I mean, as much as Mr. Biddle might.
Chair, which fence? The front
Rear
rear
part,
side.
rear fence, the back lot.
In the rear, okay.
Yeah,
Where's it here, Paul?
oh, the pink.
Right.
Pink, in the pink.
That's what I'm saying, that would become back to the city, we put the fence up, that'd be ours, Paul can do his drainage. We don't have to worry about the second lease, we could just build everything up to 42. The 42 spaces is more than enough spaces, you're saying they need 23, you're gonna research that, because we're not holding you to that, because you already said that on the record.
Thank you. That
Now,
was
going to the
qualified.
42, there is a there is a curve that you can't see, but when that stream comes down, then it makes a left turn, it comes up alongside of the 42 parking spots. Well, as that water rips around that corner, it's going to start to erode, and it has eroded. Now, my Army Corps of Engineers
Don't
permit,
tell them that, we'll be down to 40 places, we're gonna want to cut it tomorrow.
And 38.
Yeah.
the Army Corps of Engineers only allowed me under a US permit to do 500 linear feet of riprap. So we have to become very selective, because 500 linear feet is not a lot of riprap. So we put them at strategic points in the two streams that we have our permit for. Having said that, down in that area, we riprapped it, and we have drainage that comes into it. But the fact of the matter is, if we continue to take high volumes of water, because every time you lay in a road, on a hill, we're gonna get more water on the airport. There's absolutely no getting around it. And we continue to take more water. I don't know where it's gonna go.
Yeah.
I might have to take that fence where those buildings are, those small shacks that the Horseshoe Club has, move them out of there and start moving the fence closer into that area to control the water.
Paul?
Okay. There's still a little bit of work to do on this. I'd like to see Mr. Biddle give planning the plans for Chuck E. Cheese, so they can have some idea how much ultimate parking space they're going to need. We can nail that down. I'd like to see a
I need to.
codicil in the lease that gives us an escape clause if we need to take those parking spaces back and break the lease because of drainage, because of building some other place. I mean, this is clearly going to be an issue at some point, hopefully not for 50 years, but it could happen. I'd like to see the administration brought in on this. I mean, maybe they have some ideas about the taxes. I'm not that comfortable just shooting from my hip, saying, you know, it's assessed at 10 grand, let's make it 15. Jack and I think that's a pretty good figure, and, you know, we'll talk about it at Chuck's tonight. I mean, you know, I'd like to see something a little bit more concrete. Maybe the administration has some ideas. This is a council matter. It's not an administration matter, but input from them would be welcome. I'm concerned about this rear parcel. Paul gets his hands on it. We'll never get it back for anything, and that no disrespect to Paul, but the thing is that there'll be airplanes there, or there'll be a retention pond or something like that, and it will reduce any chance of expansion here, or if the state brings in a new statute, increases parking, or God forbid EIC gets involved in this or whatever, we're kind of getting boxed in. But I just want to say this. I want to move forward here. I want Mr. Biddle to get his tenant in. I want the business to reopen. I want people to come to the area to shop, to recreate, to eat, to drink, to whatever they're going to be doing there, and to pay taxes. So I think that we have a vested interest in making this work. I think that we can make it work, but I think tonight's a little premature. But before we make a motion, I just want to hear from Mr. Biddle as to what his time frame is. I don't want to keep him hung up. Are we looking at a week? Can we go a month or two? It seems there's a lot of work that we need to do here. I know the Corporation Council's busy, planning I know is busy, and I know the airport's busy, and the administration clearly is busy. So it's nice to be able to tell all these guys, let's get together and have a big powwow, but they've got other agendas that they need to do. So the longer we can go on this, the more complete we'll make it when we finally come back. But we may not be able to, you may not have the time. So through the chair, I'd like to.
Well, I think that Chuck E. Cheese is going to be coming into the city imminently. I was under the impression that he had already submitted an application, but that sounds like you would certainly know.
Or Jennifer, maybe, right?
Yeah.
So, I think I have 30 days to figure this out before I have an issue with Chuck E. Cheese, and I'm just operating on the
Chuck E.
assumption that
Chucky,
I-
not Chunky?
Chuck,
Chunky.
Chuck
Dennis,
dash
Dennis.
cheese.
Chuck.
Nieces or nephews or?
CHUCK dash E
Never
dash
met someone that
cheese.
You are a classic.
Well, I was thinking, I was gonna tell you, Mr. Knapp, that if you want Chuck E. Cheese,
Yeah.
you gotta think outside the button.
Man, they don't get any better.
The other thing I wanted to mention was in terms of the term of the lease, what's important to me is to not have a parking lease that is shorter than my lease with Chuck E. Cheese, so I don't have a issue there with my lease expires while Chuck E. Cheese is in there.
And what are they gonna
And-
be?
And I've agreed to comply with zoning for Chuck E. Cheese, and all of a sudden, I'm in a bind. 15 years from now, I believe the Chuck E. Cheese lease is a 10-year lease with 2 5-year options, I believe, but I'll confirm that.
If you could push that, I'd be more comfortable with that, 10 with 2 5s.
Okay, I'll
Then I would be
I'll double check
30.
that and
So,
get back.
Paul's always gonna,
If I may, I think we could do 5s with very good re-upping clauses that might satisfy Mr. Biddle and also satisfy Paul.
right, well, that's what I'm saying.
With the debt charge in there,
The
that if we-
20-year term, no matter how we cut it.
If we have to get that land, we're gonna take the land. It's our land. We don't have to go to eminent domain on this one. If there's some extraordinary thing happens in 7 years and we have got to get that land because the Corps is screaming bloody murder, the runway starts to sink or something, or they wind up filling up too much wetlands on Route 7 around the corner,
Oh,
and then,
please.
right? You
Let's not
know,
even go.
Please don't.
we'll be able to get this land. So I think that if Corporation Council could draft a re-upping clause, what's the terminology? The
Option
resale.
and option.
And the option, we could do 5 years, it would satisfy Paul and satisfy Mr. Biddle, it would certainly satisfy me. I'm not that comfortable with 10,
Right.
but I think we could do 5s with almost automatic options that, I mean, look, if you're using it and you need it, I don't want to take it away from you.
You just want to get rent.
Right, I want to get rent, I want this matter to be settled, but I don't want to, in any way, shape, or form, you would have no idea, you know, you do property management, you have no idea what a headache is until you start getting involved with the FAA in an airport.
Mhm.
We have been dealing with those guys, with all due respect to the FAA, for decades,
Mm.
and it gets more Byzantine every year. So I don't want to put us in a position where we're looking back at tonight and saying that's where we really screwed up, so.
Mr. Biddle, if I could ask you, the current, you're looking at Chuck E. Cheese. Chuck E. Cheese is tennis halls.
I like Chuck E. Cheese, that's a more apt description. I
Would it
think.
be a deal breaker if those 33 spaces were not available on your end? You know, I don't want to go pulling at the pink section or the backs, you know what I'm saying?
I don't believe so. I just need to meet zoning requirements.
Okay.
And if it's not required for zoning, I don't believe.
Because I
Chuck E.
want to, over the
Cheese-
next couple, 3 weeks, explore that possibility and
Mhm.
see if that's feasible for us,
Mhm.
what's good, what's bad. I
Mhm.
really, don't have enough information on that tonight to sit here and say, let's pull that, let's work this side.
Mhm.
I want to go back and get a better idea where we're
Okay.
at there.
I'll confirm that.
But again, I am uncomfortable with 5% forever, is the way I see it, Because I don't know why you'd ever want to take 33 spaces if you only got to pay 5% for 20 years.
But if I may, we could put a limit on that.
Mhm.
It could be 5% for a year, 18 months, 24 months, or something like that, and it expires. And then you have to come back to us and
We can
start it all
explore
over
that.
again.
We can explore that too. Maybe we'll do that.
That's a pretty good incentive. If you're gonna lose that option
Right.
in a year or two, it's a pretty good incentive to decide what you wanna do with it. It might be worth it at that point for them just to take it for a few $1,000 a year, get rid of that headache.
Okay. Before we close, Mr. Biddle, anything else you want to throw at us?
Just about the taxes, I have no reserves set up or anything to pay these taxes. We did not believe we owed any taxes, and so I would prefer to make a clean deal. If we're gonna fight about the prior taxes, then call me in default and let's fight, and let's go to court and settle it. But I'd prefer not to try to mix apples with oranges
Exactly.
if I could, and just, we structured these leases as gross leases going forward,
Yeah.
the way we believe the old lease was. And If the city wants to structure it another way, you know, what's important to me is the total dollar amounts that are paid, not how it's allocated.
Understood. I think the charge of this committee is not to really fight for our rollback taxes. The charge of this committee is to move ourselves forward, to create the new lease.
Yeah.
And if, you know, once we get more information, I get more information as to where those taxes really are at, you know, as far as talking to the tax assessor, then I'll be in a more educated position to comment on that. But,
And just finishing up on that.
Hold on.
Sorry.
so, yeah, so if you would.
And just finishing up on that thought, if it becomes a component of this lease that we pay the taxes, we just need some mechanism where these taxes can be reviewed and not have to sit and wait till the next grand list comes up, the next opportunity to appeal what I believe are very strange assessments on them. Because otherwise, we're gonna get stuck with a very big tax bill and no way to do anything about it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, what I do for the leases that I have on the airport, if one of the tenants on the airport is leases city property, wants to appeal the tax assessment that's been levied on it, they bring me the form, I sign it on behalf of the city, and they go before the Board of Tax Review.
Additionally, Mr. Chairman,
I've always done that.
just so you understand that one of the reasons Mr. Biddle brought up a point, the city hasn't enforced it, one of the reasons the city had not enforced it was the same reason that he just mentioned, that both parties wanted to live together to continue the arrangements for the mutual benefit. And we were in really ongoing negotiations about this issue. Neither one wanted to terminate anything, so it was a matter of trying to come to some accommodation, including that time when we're hoping to work the tax into the lease, which may still be the best alternative at some point, but it's not that anybody ignored the issue. There was tremendous amount of discussion and consideration of all angles of these assessments, except we didn't really look at the number of how high the assessments were, because that's, you know, that's something the assessor figures out, but there was every effort made to maintain the leases to the extent possible and hope that this would be resolved at some point. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't get resolved, and then you end up with an issue which has to be resolved later. That's the way this one turned out.
Okay.
You know, if I may, before we make a motion, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if the tax assessor was brought into this. I'd like to see a resolution, and maybe have it spread out over 30 years. I mean, maybe it's not gonna be 125,000, maybe it's gonna be 60, and you spread that out over 30 years, it's an extra 2,000 a year, and it's done, and going forward, there won't be any taxes. So we don't even have to call it taxes, some sort of payment on top of the present figure, which I'm pretty comfortable with. I think it's okay in the present economy. I'd like to see a little bit more, but, you know, I can live with it. But maybe something attached to that, you know, covers an agreed upon sum for the
Again,
past.
just to understand that in 2004, whenever that was the whole idea, is that there was a built-in component that was going to resolve the tax issue by working it into the lease. That would have moved that issue forward, done. But those negotiations didn't
Well,
consummate.
maybe we can do it
That's the
now,
problem.
maybe we can. work
It's a
something out.
higher amount, so it's a little, you might have to
I
go
know,
out
but maybe-
farther on. or
Maybe we
something.
can work on the amount too, that's all I'm
Let's
gonna
do this
say.
then, Paul. Let's extend the meeting. I'm thinking 30 to 45 days. Try to
Plus
get this,
45
this
days.
closed up before July 1st is what I want to shoot for. We can get this-
Let me make a motion to continue the meeting in 45 days.
Okay. I'll second that, obviously, because I'm the only one here to second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed, nobody's opposed. So we'll do that, extend the meeting for 45 days. During that point, you know, we'll research the tax thing, we'll come up with a game plan. We'll communicate through Les to you,
Okay.
you know, what we're thinking. And give Paul and I, and Mary, who's not here, a chance to, on the paper, and get a better idea of exactly what we want to come up with. And I think, I'm pretty confident that we'll come to that.
I'll be out of town the middle 2
Wait a
weeks
minute,
of
wait a
June.
minute.
That's when we're meeting.
It's gonna be July, right?
Good.
I'm gonna be going all through July.
No, we want to get done before July.
Before.
That's what I'm saying.
So
Within
like
next
the
45
last
days.
week of June, maybe?
Within 45 days. I'm
Okay,
gonna shoot for
if
the
it's
last week.
before July, I'm fine, but I'm going
I'm
July.
going to July too, so.
Do we have an
All
extra
right.
copy of these leases? Are they two leases or one?
Yeah, there's two.
Yeah, there's two. I think I got an extra set.
If you would have been here at the beginning of the meeting, you would have found out.
I know.
Okay, motion to adjourn, Paul?
So moved.
Mr.
Second.
If I need to get in touch with you,